Hey, I'm Coach T, and this is week 29 of my C Sharp Dev Diary, where I've been logging my progress learning C Sharp and most recently Unity for the last 29 weeks out of a year. This week, I worked almost exclusively on state machines, trying to understand how they work, trying to understand how to govern the relationship between states, trying to understand how the state machine itself enforces and then transitions states safely. And I wrote a couple. I wrote one that was just my own idea based on the research that I had done out of the books that I have, the little bit of YouTube research, and talking with like ChatGPT, the LLMs, to get kind of a broader idea, starting from literally scratch. And the closest thing that I could think of was the simple AI systems that I wrote for the board games that I've written, or not board games, but the skirmish games, where there are a couple of like keywords that determine how that thing is going to act on the next round. And if you're running the game and you know what the keywords mean, like like terrified or light averse or aggressive, then you don't have to define the state because you know it's in the rule book. But when the round plays out, it's going to act in the aggressive state for the duration of the round, and then it double checks itself at the end to see, oh, is that still the word I should be using? So to me, the finite state machine was kind of similar. It was a code version of that. I wrote a couple. I really just played with idle for a long time, but I have a model, and I'll show the model off in a little bit, of a monster that I model for 3D printing. I don't have it in front of me. I should have brought it, but whatever. It's for the game Feet First into Hell, and then I also I textured and modeled it last weekend while we were watching a non-Bills football game. So it's low poly, it's simple texture, 256 resolution texture, but viewed from a distance, I think it looks okay. So anyway, so I worked on that, and I built the simple class-based state system, but it was difficult to use because I didn't really know what I was doing. So I ended up watching an iHeart Game Dev video on it. I ended up watching, I think, a Bracky's video on state machines, a handful of others, and then I stumbled on one where he wasn't playing any weird tricks with like enums and type safeties. It was just a simple active observer model. I think is he called it something like that. But basically, the state was reporting back to the state machine when it should be changed. And then he was using strings to change it. But I was thinking, like, right away, I made a typo. And I was like, maybe I should use the enum listing type that I had seen in the iHeart Game Dev video instead. So what I ended up doing is I built a hybrid of their two models. It's not as elegant as the iHeart Game Dev one, but it's easier for me to implement new states. And I built four states technically yesterday, and I tested all of them. And I'll put it on screen. I'll show you me running away from a flock of the Griblies that are running the state machine. The whole thing only occupies a couple hundred lines of code, and I can make new states fairly easily. I have to add them to the initial character state register that's defined in the base state machine, whatever. But taking that and then building a new implementation of like an allied state machine wouldn't require a significant amount of re-rigging, I don't think. So I'll put it up here on the screen. I'm not going to show the code because it's broken up into many different places. I'm going to show a graph. So this is the overall state machine. So you start in idle, and if for whatever reason current state is ever null, it generates a new idle state. But I have a factory pattern running at the top head of the state machine where it calls out and it has the classes construct themselves. And then also to reduce the duplicated code, it passes itself in as a parameter for the state machine so that each one of these substates can call back to it and say, hey, cue the next state. So I used a constructor trick that I had seen rather than duplicating code and having to muck around in the editor. The other thing that I did too, and I don't know if I'm going to regret it in the long term, is so base state, which isn't on here, it should be, base state implements an iState interface, and then all of these inherit from base state. So they all necessarily implement the iState interface. And what I found is that I could use base, though, as a generic to plug these things in, and that works pretty well, at least so far. And it is doing enough of different things to say while it's not robust, it's definitely extensible. So In idle, basically all it's doing is it's ray casting to seek the player objects, and it plays an animation that loops. The animation's like 4 or 5 seconds long. It's basically just lashing its tail back and forth and looking around. What I haven't done here is I haven't extended the number of rays coming out of it. I don't know exactly how I want this to work because I've never done rays with differing vectors, but my understanding is basically I fire a shotgun spray of rays out from the front, and then if any of those sense it, then we move into another state, which I understand the mechanics of how that would work in the code. I don't understand how to fire all those rays. It must be an array, maybe. I'm going to have to look into the ray casting API. So what happens then, these shouldn't be going both ways, but I was fighting with Affinity. So if it senses a ray cast, then it goes into pursuit. And pursuing has its own animation. I animated the little guy running, and it gets low to the ground. It runs on its little chicken legs, and then it will seek the player's objects that determine the distance. And what that means is basically when it's idle, if it senses a player object, it will record that game object and pass it back to the state machine as a reference and cache it there so that it can pursue. And it will pursue using a nav mesh agent so that it can avoid obstacles and stuff, and it will get itself there as long as the player stays more or less within sight for, I think, 5 or 10 seconds. It will continuously pursue you. And if it goes into searching mode, it runs a coroutine through the base state machine, which is mono behavior. And then during that searching period, it's got a clock running that goes for however arbitrary many seconds for that model. And if it hits 0, it'll pause and it'll go back to ray casting for a couple more seconds just to see, almost like it's looking around, and then it'll go back to idle. So at the moment, this isn't its own state. That's why it doesn't have its own color. It's kind of a variant of idle that runs within the base state machine because I need to use the mono behaviors. So at some point, I might make it its own substate where I can be a little bit more specific about like animations and stuff. I have like a shiver animation that looks like it's frustrated that I want to run, but I was pretty focused on just getting this chain working. So that's what I mean about extensible. I could turn this into a class and just leave the requisite necessary mono behavior functions in the base state, and I think it would be fine. So anyway, so if you're pursuing and it gets within either of these two arbitrarily defined distances in the character sheet, then it will try to pause right away and make a randomized animation. So at first I was concerned that the player would get out of the way, but now I can see that, I can just extend the range at which that attack is valid. I play the animation. I'm not dealing damage to the player yet. I have a couple wrinkles to sort out about how to activate and deactivate hitboxes, but it does play the animation. It's very quick. I realized pretty quickly it needed to be like 3 or 4 frames, so it whacks with a leg. And it runs a random integer as well to figure out which leg it's going to attack with. So there's 2 animations. They're just paste flipped in Blender, and it'll strike with the leg. Oh, and I keyed all these animations myself, by the way. The model, the textures, the animations, the system, all this is done by me over the last week. And then this one, I have it pseudo-coded, but I don't have it written yet, even though the necessary parts of it they're already baked into the state machine, but I just don't have a character that can shoot a projectile yet. But basically, it will pursue, and if you get within this arbitrary boundary, then it will pause and it'll use a ray cast to fire at the player's last known position. I don't know if it's a particle or if it's like a glob or something. I don't want to just ray cast and shoot the player with a laser because it'll always hit. But yeah, so that's roughly how that works. And then from any state, I have an event subscription tied to the character sheet. If the character sheet senses that its hit points drop to 0, then it will fire an event that's picked up by the base state machine, and it will override everything, and it'll switch to dead. So that can happen in the middle of a state. If it's trying to shoot, it'll just cease executing that code. So yeah, that's the state machine, basically. I'll put it up here on the screen for a second just so you can see running around. It's neat. It's fun. It's obviously still a little bit clunky, but this is really my first attempt making it, so I'm pleased that it's working. And I think this week coming up, I've got a day off, but I've got some other stuff going on. So I think I'm gonna work on. I want to get ranged attack working, so I may need to do another model, and just get something that will shoot. Or I guess I could do it with a cube. if I absolutely had to. But I want to get something else working here, and then I would like to get a retreating state as well. And then I kind of feel like I've got what I need for basic video game enemies. You know, if its health drops to blah 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 blah, then it will go to retreat and it'll just run using the nav mesh agent to like an arbitrary distance away, and then it'll go back into searching or recovery mode or something like that. Regenerate its hit points and then come back at you. And I also need to make it so that the player can kill these things, because at the moment, as you can see, I am being chased around by a flock of evil space chicken demon xenomorph things, and I can't kill them. So occasionally you do get totally locked in, and there's just nothing you can do. So yeah, that's it. That's what I'm working on. That's where we've been for the last couple of days. Really, all of Tuesday, all of Wednesday, or Thursday, all of Friday, my work time. And it did take me a couple hours on Friday, so I'm a little bit cognitively burned on code. But once I get this, then I think I need to work on. I need to work a little bit more on the gunplay and improve the feel. I might have to start making my own animations and models for the player too, because I'm a little bit limited by what Mixamo can do. Because it just doesn't quite match what I want. So yeah, other than that, proceeding apace, still having fun. I'm going to stick with Unity for the short-term foreseeable future. I don't remember when the end date on the 3-month experiment was. It's right around now. I'm going to keep going with Unity. That's the decision. Because I'm doing most of this on my own. I'm asking LLMs for ideas and explanations, but not code. So if I ever don't know something, or I forget how a method works, I can always pop onto the Unity docs or Reddit or Stack Overflow or the LLMs, and I can usually figure out what I need to know to move on. So I'm hoping by the summer at this rate, give myself another 6 months, I'll have enough of an understanding to have built at least a level. With some end states, some victory states. I want to play with timelines and introducing like patrols maybe. So yeah, I don't know. I'm having fun. I don't exactly know where my ceiling is here, so I'm just trying to learn one step at a time. Importing animations, importing textures, seeing my own custom models kind of come to life for real. Not following a tutorial, but just working on my own was kind of a highlight of the week. Especially once they started chasing me around and trying to kill me. So that's where we're at. Yeah, and I guess I will see you guys next week. All right.